Story 1. A House That Knows Their Secret. This story is about a family who moves into an old house on the outskirts of the city, hoping to leave their past behind and start anew. However, the house seems to have other plans. It begins to reveal their deepest secrets, reminding them of things they thought were long buried. What starts as small, unsettling occurrences soon escalates into a terrifying confrontation with their own history, one they can no longer escape. The house knows their secrets, and it will make sure they remember. We moved into the house on a bright and unassuming autumn day. The air was crisp with the first hints of winter, and the leaves fell in slow, lazy spirals, coating the lawn in a blanket of red and gold. It was supposed to be a fresh start for us, a new chapter, a place where we could finally shake off the lingering shadows of our old life and begin anew. That's what I kept telling myself. Anyway, the truth, though, was a little more complicated. Our family had been through a lot in the past few years. My wife, Hannah, and I had made a silent agreement never to speak of it again, but the tension had never really gone away. Our son Max was just 8, too young to fully understand the magnitude of what had happened, yet old enough to sense that something wasn't right. He'd been quiet ever since we moved. Quieter than usual, at least. I chalked it up to the stress of moving to a new place, away from his friends and familiar surroundings. The house itself was a large, imposing Victorian, with gabled roofs and narrow, tall windows that seemed to watch us as we unpacked. It had stood there for over 100 years, an old relic on the edge of town that had been empty for nearly a decade. We got it for a good price, too good, some would say, but we weren't in a position to be picky. We needed to get out of the city, away from the memories, the reminders, the endless whispers. At first, things seemed normal. There were the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling, the occasional draft that swept through the halls, and the strange acoustics that made it sound like footsteps were echoing through the empty rooms when no one was walking. Nothing out of the ordinary for a house this age. We brushed it off, focusing instead on making it feel like home. Hannah took charge of decorating, transforming the dusty rooms with her usual flair, while I spent my days working from the small office I'd set up near the back of the house. Max, on the other hand, seemed drawn to the attic. I found him up there one evening, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the floor, staring at the walls. There wasn't much in the attic. Just a few old trunks left behind by the previous owners, and a small, round window that looked out over the backyard. "What are you doing up here, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He turned to me, his face expressionless. "The house knows, Dad." "Knows what?" I asked, frowning as I crouched down next to him. He didn't answer, just shrugged and looked back at the wall, as if expecting something to appear. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. Kids have imaginations, right? Especially in a new place where everything is unfamiliar and strange. "Come on," I said, standing up. "It's getting late. Let's head down for dinner." He followed me without protest, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Later that night, as I lay in bed next to Hannah, I found myself staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the wind outside. The house knows. What did Max mean by that? The next few days passed uneventfully, or at least that's what I told myself. But I started to notice little things. Objects in the house seemed to move on their own. Nothing dramatic, just slight shifts. A chair would be a few inches out of place. A door that I was sure I had closed would be slightly ajar, lights flickering for no apparent reason. Small things that could easily be explained away. The house was old, after all. Old houses had quirks, but Max's behavior started to worry me more. He was spending more and more time in the attic, sometimes disappearing up there for hours at a time. And he wasn't talking much anymore, at least not to me. When I asked him what he was doing up there, he'd just shrug and say, "Listening." Listening to what? I'd ask, but he'd never give me a straight answer. Then one night something changed. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m., and I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. Hannah was beside me, her breathing slow and steady. I'd been staring at the ceiling again, my mind drifting in and out of consciousness when I heard it, a soft rhythmic tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but then I realized it was too regular for that, too deliberate. I sat up, my heart thudding in my chest. The sound was coming from above. For a moment, I debated waking Hannah, but something told me not to. I didn't want to scare her. So I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, grabbing the flashlight I kept on the nightstand. The house was silent as I made my way through the dark hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. When I reached the attic door, I hesitated. The tapping had stopped. Slowly, I opened the door, the old hinges creaking loudly in the quiet house. I climbed the narrow staircase, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as I reached the top. The attic was just as I'd left it. Empty, save for the old trunks and the small window, but something felt different. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. Then I saw it. In the dust on the floor just beneath the window were words. Words that hadn't been there before. Written in jagged lines, like someone had traced them with their finger. We know. I stared at the message, my blood turning to ice. The words seemed to pulse in the dim light as if they were alive, breathing. I knelt down, my heart pounding in my ears. The dust was undisturbed except for those letters. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. But the words... Suddenly I felt a presence behind me, cold and oppressive. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping through the empty space. There was nothing. No one. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone was watching me. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The house was too quiet. Too still. I wanted to run, to wake Hannah and Max, to get us all out of there. But I couldn't. Something held me in place, a dark, suffocating presence that I couldn't see but could feel all around me. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, I heard a soft whisper. A voice, faint but unmistakable, calling my name. David. It was coming from the walls. I stumbled down the stairs, my mind racing. I wanted to believe it was just a dream, a trick of the mind, but the words in the attic, those jagged, haunting letters, were too real to ignore. The house knows, but what does it know, and why is it watching us? That night as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different now, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The walls seemed to hum with a low, malevolent energy, as if they were listening, waiting, and then just before dawn, I heard it again. The voice. The voice. It was soft at first, almost like a murmur carried by the wind. But David, I jolted upright, every muscle in my body tensing as I strained to listen. For a long moment, there was nothing but the heavy silence of the house. Then it came again, clearer this time, as though it was right next to me, whispering into my ear. David. My blood ran cold. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. Hannah stirred beside me but didn't wake. I was almost grateful she didn't hear it. I wasn't ready to explain what was happening, mostly because I didn't understand it myself. I grabbed the flashlight again, though this time I wasn't sure why. If there was something in the house, something speaking to me, what good would a beam of light do? The voice hadn't come from the attic this time. It seemed to resonate from somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath the house, the basement. The idea made my skin crawl. We hadn't spent much time down there since moving in, other than to store a few boxes. The basement had always felt damp and claustrophobic, and neither Hannah nor I liked going down there. But now, with the voice calling me, there was no avoiding it. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the air grew colder, the chill biting at my skin. My breath hung in the air, visible in the beam of the flashlight. The basement stretched out before me, empty save for a few cobwebbed shelves and stacks of boxes. But something felt off, like the room was somehow larger than it appeared, as though the walls could shift and move in ways that defied logic. David. The voice was stronger now, more insistent. It wasn't just calling me, it was summoning me. I shone the flashlight around the basement, searching for the source of the sound, and then I saw it. A door. I could have sworn it hadn't been there before. It was small, set into the far wall, almost hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was old. its wooden frame cracked and splintered, with rusted metal hinges that looked as though they hadn't been touched in years. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to turn around and go back upstairs to pretend I hadn't seen the door. But I couldn't. I was drawn to it as if some unseen force was pulling me closer. With trembling hands, I pushed the boxes aside and reached for the door handle. It was cold to the touch, freezing even, as if the door had been sealed in ice. I hesitated for only a moment before turning the handle and pulling it open. Beyond the door was darkness. Thick, impenetrable darkness that swallowed the light of my flashlight as though it were nothing. I shined the beam into the black void, but it revealed nothing. Just endless, suffocating emptiness. For a moment, I stood there, staring into the abyss, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be lurking in the shadows. Then I stepped forward. The air grew colder still as I crossed the threshold, and the floor beneath my feet felt uneven, like it was made of rough, ancient stone. The walls closed in around me, the space narrowing with every step. It felt less like I was walking into a room and more like I was descending into the earth itself, into a space that had no right to exist. As I moved deeper into the passage, the voice grew louder, more insistent. David, it was no longer a whisper. It was a low, rumbling chant, reverberating through the walls, as if the very house was calling my name. My heart raced in my chest, and my hands shook as I gripped the flashlight tighter. Then I saw it. At the end of the narrow passage, there was another room, this one larger, though still cloaked in shadow. The light from my flashlight barely pierced the gloom, but I could make out shapes in the darkness. Furniture, old rotting furniture, arranged in a way that suggested someone had lived here once. A table, a chair, a bed, all of it covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched for who knew how long. And in the center of the room there was a mirror. It stood tall and imposing, its frame ornate and gilded, yet tarnished with age. The glass was fogged over, as though someone had breathed on it moments before I entered. I stepped closer, drawn to it despite the dread gnawing at my gut. As I approached, the voice grew louder, more frantic. David, I stopped in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, or at least what I thought was my reflection. But something was wrong. The figure in the glass wasn't quite me. Its movements were delayed, as if it were struggling to mimic mine. Its eyes were too dark, too hollow, like twin voids that sucked in the light. My breath caught in my throat as I raised my hand to the glass. The reflection did the same, but its hand moved more slowly, more deliberately. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the mirror, and for a moment, the glass seemed to pulse beneath my touch. Then, without warning, the reflection smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was twisted, sinister, filled with malice. My heart lurched in my chest, and I yanked my hand away, stumbling back from the mirror. The smile widened, stretching impossibly far across the reflection's face. And then, with a sickening crack, the figure in the mirror stepped forward, out of the glass. I screamed, the sound echoing through the small room, but no one heard. No one was coming to help. The figure, my reflection, my doppelganger, stood before me now, grinning with a malevolence that sent icy terror through my veins. "You can't hide," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "The house knows." I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the uneven stone floor as I fled back through the passage, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voice followed me, growing louder with every step. "David, David." The wall seemed to close in around me, the air growing thick and heavy. I stumbled up the basement stairs, bursting into the kitchen, gasping for breath. I slammed the door shut behind me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lock it. Hannah appeared in the doorway, her face pale and confused. "David, what's going on?" I couldn't find the words. How could I explain what I had just seen? The house knew. It knew everything, every secret, every fear, and it wasn't going to let us leave. "We need to go," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Now." But before I could say anything else, Max's voice called out from the hallway. "Dad." I turned to see him standing there, his eyes wide and terrified. But it wasn't his fear that froze the blood in my veins. It was his words. The house knows, Dad. It knows everything. And then from somewhere deep within the house, I heard the voice again. Louder this time. Close. David. I stood frozen in place, Max's words ringing in my ears. My heart pounded as my mind tried to process what I had just heard. The house knew. It knew our secrets. Everything we had tried to bury, to forget. It's the voice from the walls. The reflection that wasn't mine. It all pointed to the same terrifying truth. Max, come here, I whispered, though my voice came out shaky and weak. I reached out to him, but he didn't move. He stood there motionless, his eyes wide and unblinking as if he were in some sort of trance. The house knows, Dad, Max repeated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was the same lifeless tone I had heard in my own reflection moments ago. It was as though Max wasn't really there anymore, like the house had taken him too. I felt Hannah's hand grip my arm. David, what's happening? Her voice trembled with fear, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw the same terror that was threatening to overwhelm me. She didn't need me to answer. She could see it in my face. She could hear it in the voice that echoed through the house, calling my name again. David, we need to leave, I said, my voice more urgent this time. We need to get out of here. Now, Hannah didn't argue. She nodded, her grip on my arm tightening as she glanced anxiously at Max. But he still didn't move. He just stood there, his face pale and blank, like he was no longer our son, but something else entirely. Something the house had twisted. Max, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I took a step toward him. Come on, buddy. We have to go. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, slowly, he blinked, his expression shifting, as if something inside him was waking up. He looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. Dad? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He was still with us. Still our son. We're leaving, okay? We're leaving the house. Grab your shoes and your coat. We're going now. Max nodded, though his movements were slow, almost robotic. He walked toward the front door, and I grabbed Hannah's hand, pulling her along as we hurried after him. My thoughts raced, my mind struggling to comprehend the things I had seen and heard. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it knew us. It knew our darkest thoughts, our regrets, our fears. It was playing with us, trapping us in some twisted game we couldn't escape. We reached the front door, but as Max reached for the handle, the air in the room shifted. A cold gust of wind blew through the hallway, slamming the door shut before he could open it. David. The voice echoed around us, louder now, almost deafening. It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from every corner of the house. It wasn't just calling my name anymore. It was everywhere, surrounding us, choking the air with its presence. Max stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear. Dad, the door? I grabbed the handle, yanking at it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the house had locked us inside, trapping us in its web. I pulled harder, my muscles straining, but it was useless. The door might as well have been welded shut. David, the voice was closer now, pressing in on us. I turned to Hannah, my chest tight with panic. The windows, I gasped, will break. Hannah nodded, her face pale as she ran to the nearest window, but before she could reach it, the walls began to tremble. A deep, groaning sound filled the house, like the very structure was shifting beneath our feet. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Max screamed, and I spun around to see him backing away from the staircase. My blood ran cold as I followed his gaze. There, at the top of the stairs, stood the figure. My reflection. It wasn't just in the mirror anymore. It was here in the house, standing at the top of the stairs, watching us with that same twisted smile. It took a step forward, its movement slow and deliberate. Its eyes locked on mine. My reflection, or whatever it was, began to descend the stairs, its smile widening with each step, the malevolent grin splitting its face in an unnatural way. Hannah gasped, backing away toward me. "David, what is that?" she whispered, her voice filled with, "I don't know," I muttered, though deep down, I did know. It was me. Or at least it was what the house had made of me. a dark reflection of everything I had hidden, every mistake I had tried to forget. "David," the voice echoed again, this time from the figure as it stepped closer, its eyes gleaming with something that wasn't human. "You can't hide from what you are. The house knows." I grabbed Max's arm, pulling him behind me as we backed away from the stairs. I had to get them out of here. I had to protect my family. But how could I fight something that wasn't even real? How could I escape a house that seemed to bend reality itself? The figure was halfway down the stairs now, its gaze fixed on me, its smile unwavering. The air around us grew colder, the walls groaning as if the house was alive and breathing. We were trapped. "David," the voice whispered again, softer this time, almost mocking. "You can't run, you can't leave." I didn't want to listen. I couldn't let the house win. But as I looked around, I realized we had no way out. The doors were sealed, the windows locked, and the figure, the twisted version of me, was coming closer. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away, my mind racing for any solution. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The basement door. The same door I had come through earlier. The one that led to the darkness beneath the house. I didn't want to go back down there. I didn't want to face whatever was lurking in that basement. But it was the only option. The only place that hadn't yet trapped Hannah. "Max." "This way," I shouted, grabbing Hannah's hand and pulling her toward the basement. Max followed close behind, his footsteps quick and frantic. We reached the door and I yanked it open, the cold air from the basement rushing up to greet us like a breath from the grave. We didn't have a choice. I led the way down the stairs, my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness as we descended. The house seemed to groan around us, the walls vibrating as if they were closing in. The voice continued to whisper my name, growing fainter, but no less chilling as we reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement was I had left it, the same cold, empty space that seemed to stretch on forever. But something was different now. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the darkness itself was alive. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, where the shadows were thickest, there was another door. A door I hadn't noticed before, or maybe one that hadn't been there earlier. It was smaller than the other doors in the house, almost hidden in the stone wall. But it called to me, just like the voice had. "David." I hesitated for only a moment before moving toward the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, and as I turned it, the cold metal burned against my skin. The door swung open, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase that seemed to descend even deeper into the earth. There was no light down there, only the thick, suffocating blackness that beckoned me forward. "This way," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. My family or myself. I couldn't turn back now. There was no going back. Only forward into whatever nightmare the house had in store for us. And so, with Hannah and Max close behind, I stepped through the door and began to descend the staircase, the voice fading behind us, but never truly gone. And the house knew our secrets, and now it wanted us to confront them. Story 2. An online game that knows too much. There are stories you hear, ones that make you roll your eyes and scoff, dismissing them as wild exaggerations or urban legends spun out of control. But what if one of those stories happened to you? That's what I thought when I first stumbled upon the online game that changed my life. It was an innocent find, or so I thought, but soon enough, it became clear this game wasn't like any other. It knew things, too many things about me. At first, it was small details, things that could have been coincidence, but the deeper I ventured, the more terrifying it became. And now, as I sit here recounting the events, I realize that this wasn't just a game. It was something far more sinister, something that had been waiting, watching, and now perhaps controlling. I've always been a gamer. For as long as I can remember, I've spent hours in front of the screen, lost in virtual worlds. I grew up in the golden era of video games, watching as graphics evolved from pixelated characters to immersive environments that could make you forget the real world even existed. So, when I found the obscure game tucked away in an online forum, it was nothing out of the ordinary for me to download it and give it a try. The game had no flashy marketing, no promotional trailers, and not even a clear developer attached to it. Just a simple title, Unknown Depths. There was something oddly enticing about its simplicity. In a world of games boasting grand storylines and intricate designs, Unknown Depths seemed like a throwback to the old-school days of minimalistic gaming. It wasn't available on any major platform, only as a direct download from the forum. That should have been my first red flag, but curiosity got the better of me. After all, many great indie games had started out similarly. The download was fast, almost unnaturally so. There was no opening sequence, no menu, just a dark screen with the words start blinking ominously. I was dropped into a barren landscape, pixelated and crude by modern standards. There was no tutorial, no introduction to what I was supposed to do. I wandered around for a bit, noticing the strange emptiness of the environment. It wasn't like any game I'd played before. No sound, no background music, just an eerie silence. After a few minutes of aimless walking, a message appeared on the screen. "Welcome, player. You're not alone here." It was a bit cheesy, but I assumed it was part of the game's attempt to create a mysterious atmosphere. I typed back my first response. "Who are..." The reply was immediate. "You'll find out soon enough." I chuckled to myself. It was probably just some clever AI designed to engage the player, so I continued exploring. Eventually, I came across what looked like a small cabin. Entering it, I found nothing inside except a single chair and a flickering screen. The moment I approached the screen, another message appeared. "Do you remember the night of August 15? 3 years ago?" My heart skipped a beat. That was too specific. That was the night my father had passed away. But how could the game possibly know that? I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I rationalized it. Maybe it was some random date the developers had programmed. Just a coincidence. But still, something about it felt wrong. I typed a response, trying to play along. "What do you know about that night?" Again, the reply came instantly. "I know you were there. I know you felt guilty." I froze. No one knew that, not even my closest friends. I had been with my father the night he died. He had asked me to stay with him, but I had left to meet up with friends instead. By the time I got back, it was too late. I hadn't told anyone. How could a game, an anonymous, obscure online game, possibly know something so intimate? I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking. It had to be a trick. There was no other explanation. Maybe it was some elaborate hoax, a hacker, or someone who'd found my personal information and used it to mess with me. But as much as I tried to convince myself of that, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut that something far more sinister was going on. I didn't touch the game for days after that. Every time I thought about it, a cold sense of dread washed over me, but despite my better judgment, my curiosity kept pulling me back. I needed answers. So after almost a week, I reopened the laptop and launched the game again. This time, when the dark screen loaded, there was no barren landscape. Instead, the cabin I had found earlier appeared immediately. Inside, sitting on the chair I had seen before, was another figure. A pixelated character, but clear. A message appeared on the screen. "I've been waiting." I hesitated before typing back. "Who are you?" There was a long pause before the response came. "I know everything about you." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I should have stopped then. I should have closed the game, uninstalled it, and moved on with my life. But something compelled me to keep playing. I asked again. "Because I'm closer to you than you think." At that moment, my phone vibrated on the desk. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. My breath caught in my throat as I read the message. "Look outside." Slowly, I got up and moved to the window. The street outside was empty, the same as it always was at this hour. But then something caught my eye. A figure standing across the road, motionless, staring up at my window. I couldn't make out any details in the darkness, but the figure was unmistakably there, and it was watching. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I rushed back to my laptop, intending to close the game, but before I could, Another message appeared. Do you believe me now? I slammed the lid of the laptop shut once more and paced around the room, trying to calm myself. It had to be a prank. Someone was messing with me. Maybe a hacker had somehow tapped into my webcam, seen my reaction, and sent someone to scare me. But how could they have known about my father? Or that I would be playing the game at that exact moment, for the next few hours? I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed staring at the closed laptop, listening for any sounds from outside. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, only to wake up in a cold sweat several hours later. The game was still on my mind, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, I decided to reach out to the forum where I had found the game. Maybe someone else had experienced something similar. I posted a message in the thread, asking if anyone else had played Unknown Depths and received strange messages, or felt like the game was watching them. To my surprise, there were dozens of responses. The responses poured in quickly, much faster than I expected. Dozens of users shared their own strange experiences with the game, but none of them seemed as personal or terrifying as mine. Most of the comments mentioned that the game had a way of digging into their lives, surfacing memories, or even revealing fears they hadn't thought about in years. But no one mentioned the game interacting with them outside of the virtual world. No one except for one user, who simply replied, "You need to stop before it's too late." One single response made my stomach turn. I clicked on the profile of the user who posted it, hoping to learn more, but their account had been deleted. There was no trace of them on the forum anymore. It felt like a warning. A final one at that. Despite the growing dread, I couldn't stop thinking about the game. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. I needed answers. I needed to know what was going on. Against my better judgment, I opened the laptop again that evening, my heart pounding in my chest. The game booted up in silence. No music. No sound effects. Just the now familiar pixelated cabin on the screen. The figure was still sitting in the chair, waiting for me. Just like before. I didn't wait for a message to appear. I typed in, "What do you want from me?" The response came quickly, almost too quickly, as if the game had anticipated my question. "I want you to remember." I froze, staring at the words. Remember? Remember what? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was the game trying to mess with me, to drag up old memories? Or was it something more sinister? I typed again, hands shaking slightly. "Remember what?" For the first time, there was a pause before the response. "The night in the woods. You never told anyone, did you?" My blood ran cold. That night. It was something I had buried deep inside me, a memory I had tried to forget. How could the game possibly know about it? Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friends and I had gone camping in the woods. It was supposed to be a fun, innocent weekend trip, but something happened, something I had never talked about. We had gotten lost, deep in the forest, and as night fell, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. At first, it seemed like a stroke of luck. I placed a shelter for the night. But as the hours ticked by, strange things began to happen. We heard voices, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One of my friends, Mark, swore he saw someone outside the window, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching us. By the next morning, we were all shaken, exhausted, and desperate to leave. We never spoke of it again. In fact, we avoided talking about that trip altogether. But now here it was, dredged up by this mysterious game, as if it had been lurking in the dark corners of my mind, waiting to resurface. I slammed my laptop shut again, my heart racing. This was no longer just a game. There was something more to it, something that was digging into my past, into memories I had tried to forget. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unleashed something that had been waiting for me all these years. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind outside my window made me jump. I kept thinking about the cabin, about the game, about the figure that had been standing across the street just the night before. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about that night in the woods. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I needed to know where this game had come from. Maybe if I could figure out who had created it, I could understand how it knew so much about me. I started with the forum where I had found the game, scrolling through old posts and trying to trace its origins. But the deeper I looked, the more unsettling things became. The forum was full of warnings, scattered between discussions about the game's strange behavior. Users claimed they had experienced bizarre events after playing unknown depths, some reporting strange sightings around their homes, others saying they felt watched or followed. Several users had disappeared from the forum altogether, their accounts deleted or inactive. One post, buried deep in the thread, caught my attention. It was from someone who claimed to have found a connection between the game and an old urban legend. A legend about a haunted program that had circulated in underground circles years ago. According to the legend, the game wasn't just a piece of software. It was something else, something that fed off the fears and memories of its players. Some said it was cursed, others believed it was a gateway to something darker. The more I read, the more my unease grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had gotten myself into something far more dangerous than I had realized. Later that evening, I received another text from the unknown number. My stomach churned as I opened it, half expecting another cryptic message. But this time it was worse. It was a photograph. The picture was of me, sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop. The angle was unmistakable. It had been taken from outside my window. I jumped to my feet, rushing to the window. But there was no one there. Just the empty street, the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. How long had I been watched? How close had they gotten? I grabbed my phone and called the police. There was no way I could ignore this anymore. But when the officers arrived, they found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no footprints outside my window. I tried explaining about the game, about the strange messages and the photograph, but they looked at me like I was crazy. One of them even suggested I might be playing too many video games, letting my imagination get the best of me. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew that someone, or something, was watching me. In the days that followed, things only got worse. The game became more aggressive, sending me messages even when I wasn't playing. Every time I opened my laptop, there was a new message waiting for me. You can't run from your past. I know your secrets. You need to remember. The memories of that night in the woods came flooding back. Memories I'd tried to suppress for years. I could see Mark's face pale and terrified as he pointed out the figure in the woods. I could hear the whispers, the voices that had seemed to come from nowhere. And then there was the cabin itself, with its dark, looming presence. I started to wonder if we had unleashed something that night, something that had been waiting all this time, lying dormant until I stumbled upon that cursed game. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. It wasn't just a game. It was a trap, a way for whatever was out there to worm its way into my life, into my mind. But it was too late. I had already let it in. The messages became more personal, more invasive. The game seemed to know everything about me. Things I had never told anyone, things I had barely even admitted to myself. It dug up old wounds, old regrets, until I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside out. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. The figure that had stood across the street that night appeared again, this time closer, always just out of reach, always watching. One night, I received a final message from the game, one that chilled me to the bone. I'm coming for you. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, pacing the room, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The house remained silent, the shadows, but I knew it wasn't over. It had never been over. The game had opened something dark, something I couldn't close. And now, it was only a matter of time before it came for me. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened paranoia. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light felt like a prelude to something terrible. The feeling of being watched never left me. I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the inevitable confrontation with whatever had been lurking in the shadows. The final message from the game still haunted me. I'm coming for you. It wasn't just a threat. It felt like a promise, a dark omen of what was to come. I knew I couldn't stay in my house any longer. I had to leave, get away from the game, from the house, from whatever was trying to get to me. But where could I go? Everywhere I went, I felt like the darkness would follow. One evening, I packed a few essentials and decided to drive to my family's old cabin in the woods. It was a place of refuge from my childhood, a safe haven. Surely, if I could get away from the city and the game, I might find some peace. As I drove, I felt the familiar dread lifting, even if just a little. I had the sense that I was escaping, putting some distance between myself and the game's dark influence. And Sir True was not arriving at the cabin. I felt a bittersweet nostalgia. The place looked the same as I remembered. Rustic, worn, but welcoming. I unpacked quickly, eager to settle in and perhaps find some solace in the memories of simpler times. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The cabin was quiet, isolated, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a semblance of safety. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that my respite was fleeting. In the middle of the night, I woke with a start. The sound of the wind howling outside was replaced by a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the window. I pulled myself out of bed and moved cautiously toward the noise. As the tapping grew louder, more insistent, almost like it was trying to communicate with me. When I reached the window, I saw nothing but darkness and the trees swaying violently in the wind. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but the tapping continued, now accompanied by a low, indistinct murmur. It was as if the night itself was trying to speak to me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up, my hands trembling. A new message had arrived. The text was short, but it sent chills down my spine. "Welcome back." My heart pounded as I tried to calm myself. How could this be happening? I had thought I was free of the game, that by leaving the city I had escaped its reach. But the message was a stark reminder that the game had found me, no matter where I went. In a state of panic, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I needed to see outside to know if someone, or something, was there. I scanned the area around the cabin, but there was no sign of anyone. The woods were still and dark. I decided to check the game. Maybe if I confronted it directly, I could understand what was happening and find a way to end it. I powered up my laptop, feeling a sense of dread wash over me as the screen flickered to life. The game loaded quickly, and there it was. Again. The familiar cabin, the figure sitting in the chair. "You thought you could escape?" The game's message read, "You belong to me." I typed back, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "What do you want from me? Why won't you leave? I want you to remember everything. The game is not just a game. It's a part of you." I sat back, stunned. The game was more than just a program. It was a reflection of something deep within me, something that had been awakened. I thought back to that night in the woods, to the fear and confusion that had haunted me ever since. The tapping on the window grew louder, more frantic. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, and the lights flickered. I realized then that the game was manipulating my reality, blurring the lines between the virtual world and the real one. Desperation took hold. I grabbed the laptop and tried to shut it down, but it wouldn't turn off. The screen stayed on, the messages coming faster now, almost like a relentless barrage. "You can't escape. Your fears, your regrets, they are mine now. Remember the cabin. Remember the voices." I tried to recall that night in the woods, piecing together fragments of memory. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. The more I thought about it, the more the fear gripped me. It was as if the game was feeding off my terror, growing stronger with every passing moment. Suddenly, the screen went black. The laptop powered down on its own, and the room was plunged into darkness. The silence was deafening, and I felt an oppressive weight on my chest, as if the darkness was pressing in on me. I fumbled for the light switch and turned it on, but the light was dim and flickering. I looked around, expecting to see something, anything, but the room was empty. The tapping on the window had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I decided to leave the cabin. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed up quickly and drove away, the sense of dread still clinging to me. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, where I checked into a small motel, hoping for some semblance of safety. The next morning I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old life, not with the game still lurking out there. I knew I had to find a way to end it, to put a stop to whatever had been unleashed. I contacted a tech expert, someone who specialized in cybersecurity and had experience dealing with unusual cases. After explaining everything, the expert agreed to help. They examined my laptop and discovered that the game had installed a hidden program, something that tracked my every move, accessed my personal information, and manipulated my environment. It was more than just a game. It was a sophisticated tool for psychological manipulation designed to exploit the fears and memories of its users. The expert was able to remove the program and clean my laptop, but the experience left me shaken. I had learned the hard way that some things are better left alone. The game was gone, but the fear it had instilled in me remained. I moved away from the city and started a new life, far from the shadows of my past. The experience had changed me, left me more cautious and aware of the dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. As I look back on it now, I realize that the game was never just about entertainment. It was a mirror, reflecting the darkest parts of my soul, a way for something malevolent to find its way into my life. And though I've escaped its grasp, I know that the shadows of those memories will always be with me, lurking just beneath the surface. In the end, the game had taught me a harsh lesson, that some fears are not easily escaped, and some parts of ourselves are best left undisturbed. Story 3. The Motorcycle with a Soul. It was a crisp autumn day when I first laid eyes on the motorcycle that would change my life. I'd always been drawn to the thrill of the open road, but what I didn't realize was that this particular bike was more than just a means of transportation. It was a gateway to a world of darkness and intrigue, a connection to forces beyond human understanding. In the following tale, I will recount the eerie events that unfolded after I bought the motorcycle and how it became clear that this machine was alive in a way that defied all logic. The sun had barely risen when I drove to the dealership, my excitement almost palpable. The motorcycle in question was a vintage model, its sleek lines and chrome finish a testament to a bygone era. It was an old Harley-Davidson, but not just any Harley. It had a unique aura about it, something that made it stand out from the rest. The dealer, an elderly man with a knowing look in his eyes, seemed almost reluctant to let it go. He spoke in hushed tones, hinting at the bike's mysterious past. Yet I was undeterred, captivated by its charm and promise of adventure. The first few weeks with the motorcycle were exhilarating. I rode it through winding country roads, feeling a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. But it wasn't long before I began to notice something peculiar. The motorcycle seemed to respond to my emotions, as if it were tuned into my very soul. On days when I was feeling particularly down, the bike would start up with a grumble that seemed to echo my mood. Conversely, when I was in high spirits, the engine roared with a power that felt almost otherworldly. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness settled over the landscape, I decided to take the motorcycle for a late-night ride. It was during this ride that I began to understand just how different this bike was. And as I turned onto an unfamiliar road, the engine seemed to hum with a strange energy, guiding me along a path I didn't recognize. The road twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the woods, where shadows danced and whispered among the trees. The further I rode, the more I felt an unsettling presence around me. It was as if the bike itself was alive, its vibrations resonating with a force I couldn't quite comprehend. I stopped in a small clearing, the motorcycle idling quietly as I took in my surroundings. The moonlight cast eerie patterns on the forest floor, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was then that I noticed something odd. An old, dilapidated barn in the distance, partially hidden by the undergrowth. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a strange compulsion, I walked towards the barn. The motorcycle followed me, its engine purring softly as if urging me to explore. Inside, the barn was filled with dust-covered relics of a time long past. Rusty farm tools, old barrels, and cobwebs that hung like veils over the forgotten objects. In the corner, partially obscured by shadows, my heart raced as I approached it, compelled by an inexplicable urge to open it. The box creaked open to reveal a collection of old photographs and letters. As I sifted through them, I discovered that they belonged to a man who had lived a century ago, a man with a passion for motorcycles. There were pictures of him with various bikes, each one more beautiful than the last. But it was the final photo that caught my eye. A portrait of the man standing proudly next to a Harley Davidson, the very model I now owned. The inscription below read, "To those who ride with courage and heart." A sense of foreboding washed over me. It was as if the motorcycle was somehow connected to this man and perhaps to something far darker. That night, as I rode back home, the bike seemed to sense my unease. The engine roared louder, and the headlights cut through the darkness with an almost menacing intensity. The feeling of being watched never left me, and when I finally arrived home, I could hardly shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. Over the next few days, I began to experience strange occurrences. The motorcycle would start on its own, even when the key wasn't in the ignition. It would sometimes move slightly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. I could hear whispers when I was near it, and the engine's growl seemed to carry a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. One rainy evening, I decided to investigate further. I parked the motorcycle in the garage and sat quietly, trying to discern any clues about its mysterious behavior. As the rain tapped against the metal roof, I noticed that the bike's headlight flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, and I could make out fragmented words, fragments of a conversation that seemed to be coming from the motorcycle itself. It was then that I understood the true nature of the motorcycle. It wasn't merely a machine. It was a conduit for something otherworldly. The connection between the bike and its previous owner seemed to transcend the boundaries of life and death. The motorcycle had a will of its own, and it was intricately linked to forces that defied human comprehension. As the days turned into weeks, the motorcycle's influence over me grew stronger. It began to affect my dreams, filling them with dark, twisted imagery and a sense of impending doom. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding as if I had been running from something. The motorcycle was no longer just a vehicle. It was a part of me, and it was clear that it had its own desires and intentions. In the darkness of the night, when the rain fell in torrents and the wind howled through the trees, I would find myself drawn to the motorcycle, unable to resist its call. It was as if it had a life of its own, guiding me towards an unknown destiny. I was trapped in a web of mystery and fear, and the motorcycle was the key to unraveling it all. And the more I tried to distance myself from the bike, the stronger its grip became. It was as if the motorcycle was determined to keep me within its sphere of influence, leading me deeper into a world of shadows and secrets. I knew that I had to uncover the truth behind its origins and its connection to the supernatural forces that seemed to surround it. Little did I know that the answers I sought would reveal even darker truths, and the journey ahead would test the very limits of my sanity. As I prepared to delve deeper into the mystery of the motorcycle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of discovering something both profound and terrifying. A truth that would forever change my understanding of reality. The motorcycle had become more than just a machine. It was a symbol of a world beyond our own, a realm where the boundaries between life and death blurred, and where the past had a way of coming back to haunt us. As I looked at it sitting silently in the garage, I knew that the real adventure was only just beginning. The days following my discovery of the old barn and the mysterious box were a blur of restless nights and strange occurrences. I was no longer just a rider of a classic motorcycle. I had become entangled in a web of supernatural intrigue. My connection with the bike had deepened, and I could no longer ignore the growing sense of unease that accompanied every interaction with it. One particularly stormy night, as lightning illuminated the sky and thunder rumbled ominously, I found myself drawn to the motorcycle once again. The garage, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The motorcycle stood there, silent and still, but its presence was more palpable than ever. The whispers I had heard before were now clearer, more insistent. It was as if the bike was trying to communicate something to me, but the message remained just out of reach. I approached the motorcycle, feeling an almost magnetic pull. As I reached out to touch the handlebars, a jolt of electricity surged through my fingers, sending a shiver up my spine. The engine roared to life, its growl vibrating through the entire garage. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the bike seemed to come alive before my eyes. The headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and the engine's growl took on a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. In a trance-like state, I mounted the motorcycle and started it up. The storm outside intensified, and the rain battered against the garage door as I revved the engine. The motorcycle seemed to have a mind of its own, guiding me out of the garage and onto the rain-slicked streets. I was no longer in control. The bike was steering me towards an unknown destination. As we rode through the storm, the world outside became a blur of dark shapes and flashing lights. The motorcycle seemed to know exactly where it was going, weaving through the streets with an uncanny precision. My surroundings became increasingly unfamiliar, and I realized that we were heading towards the outskirts of town, towards the same wooded area where I had discovered the old barn. The rain pounded down torrents, and the wind howled through the trees as we entered the forest. The motorcycle's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow, winding path that seemed to lead deeper into the woods. I had a vague sense of déjà vu, as if I had been here before, though I couldn't recall when or why. The path eventually led to a clearing, and in the center stood an old, decrepit mansion. The house loomed over me, its once grand facade now covered in ivy and decay. It was as if the mansion had been abandoned for decades, but something about it felt eerily familiar. The motorcycle came to a halt on its own, and I dismounted, my legs trembling as I approached the mansion. The front door creaked open with a haunting groan, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. I hesitated for a moment, but the motorcycle seemed to urge me forward, its engine idling softly as if waiting for me to enter. With a deep breath, I stepped inside. The interior of the mansion was a labyrinth of shadowy corridors and dusty rooms. The air was thick with the scent of mold and neglect, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. As I moved through the mansion, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols and runes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The atmosphere was charged with an oppressive energy, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I eventually came across a large study, its walls lined with shelves of ancient books and dusty tomes. At the center of the room was a grand desk, cluttered with old papers and artifacts. On the desk was an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. I opened the journal and began to read, my heart racing as I discovered its contents. The journal belonged to the man in the photographs I had found in the barn. His writings detailed his obsession with the supernatural and his experiments with various occult practices. It became clear that he had been searching for a way to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, and his writings hinted at a dark ritual that could imbue objects with a form of consciousness. The more I read, the more I realized that the motorcycle was not just a machine, but a vessel for the man's restless spirit. According to the journal, the man had performed a ritual to bind his own essence to the motorcycle, hoping to achieve immortality through his creation. However, something had gone terribly wrong. Instead of achieving eternal life, he had become a trapped soul, bound to the motorcycle and forced to exist in a state of limbo. The motorcycle had become a conduit for his spirit, and it was now my responsibility to free him from his torment. As I continued to read, the mansion seemed to come alive around me. The shadows grew darker, and the temperature dropped dramatically. I could hear faint whispers and see flickering lights in the corners of my vision. The motorcycle, which had followed me into the mansion, began to make strange noises, as if reacting to the revelations in the journal. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I knew I had to perform the ritual to release the man's spirit. The journal provided detailed instructions on how to complete the ritual, but it required a specific set of conditions and items that were not readily available. I needed to find these items and prepare for the ritual to succeed. I returned to the motorcycle, which seemed to be vibrating with a sense of urgency. It was as if the bike knew that time was running out, and that the ritual had to be performed soon. I gathered the necessary items from the mansion, using the journal as my guide, and prepared to head back to the clearing where the motorcycle had led me. The storm had subsided, and the forest was eerily silent as I set up the ritual circle in the clearing. The moonlight cast an otherworldly glow on the scene, and I could feel the presence of the spirit growing stronger. As I began to perform the ritual, the motorcycle roared to life, its engine echoing through the woods as if in response to the incantations. The air crackled with energy, and the ground seemed to tremble as the ritual reached its climax. The motorcycle's headlights blazed with a blinding light, and the whispers grew louder, merging into a single anguished cry. The spirit's presence became overwhelming, and I could feel the weight of its sorrow and longing. As the final words of the ritual were spoken, the light from the motorcycle's headlights flared brilliantly, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The clearing was silent once more, and the motorcycle was still. The oppressive energy that had filled the air was lifted, and I felt a sense of profound relief. I knew that the man's spirit had finally been freed from its torment, and the motorcycle was no longer a conduit for supernatural forces. It had returned to being just a machine, albeit one with a remarkable story. I took one last look at the clearing, now bathed in the soft light of dawn, and then mounted the motorcycle to ride back home. The journey back was tranquil, and I felt a renewed sense of peace. The motorcycle responded smoothly to my commands, and the road ahead seemed to stretch out with endless possibilities. I'd faced a dark and mysterious ordeal, but I'd emerged with a deeper understanding of the world and a renewed appreciation for the ordinary and the extraordinary. A motorcycle with a soul had led me on a journey through the unknown, and though it had been a harrowing experience, it had also been a profound and transformative one. As I rode towards the horizon, I knew that I would never forget the night when I had danced with shadows and uncovered the truth behind the motorcycle's eerie connection to the supernatural. The sun had risen fully by the time I returned home, casting a warm, golden light over everything it touched. The events of the previous night seemed almost like a dream, but the evidence of my ordeal was undeniable. The motorcycle, now just a machine, stood quietly in the garage, its once ominous presence now reduced to mere metal and leather. I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The journey had been fraught with danger and mystery, but it had also been a voyage of self-discovery. The motorcycle, with its dark connection to the supernatural, had tested my courage and resilience, and I had emerged with a newfound understanding of the unseen forces that shape our world. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to my normal life, but the impact of my experiences lingered. I found myself more attuned to the subtle nuances of life, more aware of the unseen energies that sometimes brushed against the edges of the motorcycle. Now devoid of its previous malevolent aura, became a symbol of my journey, a reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown. The vintage Harley-Davidson remained in the garage, a beautiful but now ordinary machine. I continued to ride it, though, with a greater sense of appreciation for the simple joys it brought. The thrill of the open road was still there, but the dark shadows that had once accompanied my rides were gone. I had learned that the motorcycle was not just a vehicle but a link to a world beyond our understanding, a reminder that even the most mundane objects can hold extraordinary secrets. Occasionally I would think back to that stormy night in the clearing where I had performed the ritual. The memories of the haunting whispers and the blinding light were etched in my mind, and I knew that I had touched something profoundly mysterious. The clearing, now a distant memory, had been a place where the veil between worlds had thinned, and where the past had intertwined with the present in a dramatic dance of shadows and light. As the months turned into years, I continued to tell the story of the motorcycle, with a soul to those willing to listen. It became a cautionary tale of the unknown, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored, but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of the supernatural. The old Harley-Davidson became more than just a bike. It was a vessel of memories and lessons learned. Each ride was a tribute to the journey I had undertaken, a celebration of the courage it took to confront the darkness and emerge on the other side. It was a reminder that, even in the most ordinary of things, there can lie extraordinary truths waiting to be discovered. And so, as I revved the engine and set off on yet another ride, I carried with me not just the thrill of the open road, but the knowledge that the world is filled with mysteries beyond our comprehension. The motorcycle, with its soul once entwined with the supernatural, had become a symbol of my own journey. A journey that had taken me to the edge of reality and back, leaving me forever changed.